highlights around what you can do personally to biohack stress, and also what you can do for your teams and those that you lead. I know everyone, but just to go through it one more time. My name is Kirsten McKenna. I'm a leadership and performance consultant and a well-being expert. And I've identified things in my life that create stress for me. And this isn't just negative stress. This is also positive stress. So I say yes way too often. I know that I do. And that creates stress for me. But I also enjoy the busyness of my life and how many different pockets I'm involved in. I do have a type A personality. And so I'm a high achiever, high performer. I set goals, and quite often I set too many goals, and I'm competitive. And so these play into stress as well. I'm detail oriented to a fault. And this means that I go against what I recommend to a lot of people. And rather than choosing excellence over perfection, quite often in different areas of my life, not every area, I aim for perfection, which causes stress for me. I have attention deficit disorder, and I medicate myself through meditation and exercise. But it catches up with me sometimes, and you know, I'll have 50 browsers open and I'll be all over the map, and I have a really hard time focusing on things. So that creates stress for me. I procrastinate, which is an interesting combination with detail orientation. Those two cause stress. They knock heads and cause stress in my life. Uncertainty. So since I've left corporate, there's been a lot of uncertainty in my life with regards to finances, with regards to business, with regards to the future. And that creates stress for me, but I've learned to harness it. And lastly, my husband. And I'll just leave it at that. I won't go into detail on why he creates stress for me. And Mark, I will let you introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, my name is Mark Hodgson. I'm a transformational leadership expert. And also, I'm an ex-corporate. I left corporate about 10 years ago and now run my own leadership consultancy, working with a lot of individuals and organizations to help transform. And obviously the COVID piece has really supercharged and accelerated and crunched all that down like that. So there's a lot of stuff going on at the moment with which I'm able to help people, which is good. In terms of this is a fantastic subject. What stresses me? Fear of providing, fear of being able to provide for my family. I expect a lot of myself, I think. Probably load myself up a little bit too much. You know, think nothing of working 50, 60 hours a week. You know, sometimes I get to 7 o'clock at night and I'm having a call with someone in the UK and I think, gee, I've been working for 12, 13 hours, you know, one way or the other. But I love what I do, so it doesn't feel that like that, but it's still a lot. So I try and do too much, probably like Kirsten. It's amazing. As a specialist, you also need to be a generalist when you work for yourself. So there's all kinds of bits of technology and apps and stuff that you learn how to use, but it can be quite tiring. And also, you can go down. You've got to be careful not to go down too many rabbit warrens and get lost. I'm getting better at not saying yes to too many things, saying no to things, saying no to projects so I can keep focused. But even now, I've still got sort of 4 major projects that I need to develop, and I know in reality that should probably be 1. But so you're juggling a few things and not getting anything probably done. And untidiness, which is, it's not me. I'm not a neat freak, but I'm a neater freak than both my wife and my 20-year-old son, who are the only other 2 at home at the moment. And they do drive me a bit crazy with their messiness. And I get stressed and I find myself sort of going, getting all grumpy and sounding like my dad on his worst day. I'm trying not to be that person, but sometimes I am. So yeah, that's me. I'm really looking forward to this webinar, Kirsten. We're going to learn some stuff, which is always good.
Excellent. It's always good to learn. Learning does create stress. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite you all to go to, on your phone, www.menti.com. And when you're asked, when you're prompted for a code, enter 7625. And I'd like you to just identify three things. You have three spaces to put in words that create stress for you in your life. And I'll give you a moment to do that, and then we'll come back to it. Okay. I will move on. If you're not finished, you can just finish that up, and we'll move on to the next slide. So the agenda for today is I'm going to identify what biohacking is generally. What do we mean by stress? Our stress response. And then I talk about physical action and physical input. So when you look at the definition of biohacking, there are heaps out there. Like everyone and their dog is talking about biohacking. And I have a number of friends who always talk about biohacking, you know, their bodies. And it's confusing. And I came across this definition that I really liked because it was practical. And it was the practice of changing your body's internal chemistry and physiology through science, but also self-experimentation. And all for the purpose of creating more energy and enhancing the body. This includes the brain, which ultimately includes our thought processes as well. So I really enjoyed this definition by Anthony Robbins. So the approach for biohacking that I personally take is around mindset, diet, and exercise. And for the sake of time today, I'm going to go into a lot of detail into mindset and just very brief detail on diet and exercise. There is heaps of information out there. I will send a number of resources after the webinar as well, related to those resources and assessments and approaches that you can take with regards to diet and exercise. But mindset, I think, is something that we don't know a lot about as individuals, and the researchers for the last 5+ years have been looking into how our mindset actually impacts how stress resonates in our bodies. So when we talk about stress, what do we mean? So initially, when you think about stress, you potentially think about negative stress, such as acute, episodic, or chronic stress. When we look at acute stress, most of us experience this, through different life events, loss, grief, an accident, a mishap, a failure. It's very brief, very temporary. However, it does have impacts on us emotionally, cognitively, through our bodies, whether it's through muscular tension. You might get a headache, a backache, through our stomachs. You might get tummy problems or bowel problems, heartburn, acid reflux. You might get high blood pressure, but your immune system is compromised. Even though it's acute, your immune system gets shut down, and you get more likely to acquire a cold, a flu, or any other immune system compromised illnesses. Then we have episodic stress, and this is acute on a more regular basis. So it's ongoing acute episodes. If you live a life of chaos, if you're overburdened, if you say yes too often, if negative manifestations become regular. And this results also in all of those um, physical and mental ailments mentioned, but it's longer term. It has more of an impact because of the consistency with it. So this can lead to ongoing health problems. And quite often, as leaders and as individuals, you may find yourself with episodic stress in your life because you do say yes all the time, and you do live a life of chaos and drama. And for this type of stress, it's about learning to press the pause button. And then lastly, with regards to negative stress, we have that chronic long-term stress, which is that grinding stress that eats away at us. It's an uncontrolled low-level tension. It takes place over a number of months or years because of unrelenting demands and pressure. And we know that this type of stress has serious health consequences for us. It increases our risk for a number of diseases, depression, anxiety, obesity, heart disease, so on and so forth. And we know that this is the most harmful type of stress. And things like long-term poverty, abuse, unhappy marriages, unemployment, dysfunctional family, a poor work environment, substance abuse, all of these things can contribute to long-term chronic stress. And then we have positive stress, which you hear about, also known as eustress. It can be acute or episodic, include excitement, intrigue, anticipation. Your nerves are stretched, you're learning. It drives you to achieve, to better yourself, to grow, and it's vital to developing resilience. You get it when you travel, when you get married, when you're competing, when you're learning and educating yourself, and a number of other different areas in your life. And you still get the same flurry of stress hormones, but in a minimal amount. And they act as a motivator and a driver for you to do more, to achieve more, to improve as an individual. And we typically thrive on positive stress. So what happens when we are initially stressed is we experience negative emotions. And we need to recognize first and foremost that all emotions are valid, negative and positive. And it's a fact of life that you're going to experience them, both negative and positive emotions. And it's kind of like the yin and yang. You need one to have the other, to have that balance and to have that harmony. What we don't want to happen is getting stuck in those negative emotions and using those negative emotions as directives, and worrying and ruminating and just living in fear and uncertainty and the unknown. We want to acknowledge that we're experiencing negative emotions and then move on from them. And this is something that I talk about in a number of my workshops. And it's really helpful also if you label those emotions, because it can decrease the impact of those emotions by up to 7 times. And it's really important, the language that you use when you are labeling them. So if you get angry at a situation, you say, I'm feeling angry, versus I'm angry. So you want to remove it from you as a person to the behavior, anger, or frustration, or worry, or stressed. If you say, I am stressed, it's not going to help the situation. But if you say, I am feeling stressed to yourself, then that can decrease that negative emotion significantly. Now, there's something that we found out about stress through a health psychologist, Kelly McGonigal, and that is our stress mindset. It has an influence on how our body actually processes stress. And mindset is influenced by 3 things. Number 1, whether or not you think people are inherently good. Number 2, whether or not you think people can change. And number 3, how you think about stress. So I am going to launch a poll at the moment, and you have one question. If you could all answer it, it should be up on your screen. I believe that stress is bad. Yes or no? Okay. 3 no's. That is a first. People usually say that they believe stress is bad for them. So I'm happy to hear that you don't believe stress is bad for you. That's excellent. And Mark says, oh, Mark says yes. You believe stress is bad, Mark?
Well, I think it depends, doesn't it? As you've just, some stress is good, too much stress is bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's interesting because we'll get into what that means. Yeah, and Sue agrees with you. It's dependent on type. We know that chronic stress is bad for us, right? However, if we can shift our mindset and firstly acknowledge and increase that self-awareness around when we're feeling that overwhelm and that burden, and to then think of, what can I do? Can I use this as a catalyst to make a change versus getting trapped in it? So yes, you are right. It is dependent. Now, some individuals believe that stress is negative and should be avoided, and some believe that stress is positive and should be embraced. And this was a study done by Crum, Solove, and Anchor back in 2013. And they talked about these 2 different mindsets. And what happened was they decided to do a study within a large population and look at perception of stress. And then they looked at mortality of that same population. And it turned out that if you had a lot of stress in your life, you had a 43% increased chance of dying. However, this was only true if you felt that stress was negative and should be avoided. If you had a lot of stress in your life and you felt that stress was positive and should be embraced, there was no difference in mortality rates. And so what they realized is that your mindset plays a big role in not only mortality, but also well-being. They looked at countries and compared the stress index with the well-being and happiness index. And it turns out that the higher the stress index, the higher the well-being and happiness, which they weren't expecting. And so this kind of flipped the notion of stress being bad for us on its head, purely based on the mindset that individuals have about stress, which is quite fascinating. And what all of the research has done up to this point is demonstrated that just by creating an awareness around, if you change your mind about stress, you can change your body's response to stress, actually makes a difference. So people just being provided with that information, knowing that if they just change their response to stress, their mindset about stress being good for them, they can change how their body physically and physiologically responds. And so if I'm feeling stressed and I have sweaty palms and tightness in my chest and I have an upset tummy, instead of saying, oh, I'm feeling stressed, this isn't good for me, if I flip it on its head and said, I'm feeling stressed at the moment, this is amazing that my body has this response to stress. It's telling me, pause, you need to change something here, you need to mix something up, and then act on that awareness, versus getting trapped in, I'm feeling stressed, this isn't good for me, this is going to lead to heart disease, I'm going to have a heart attack, I'm really unhealthy, I'm not capable, I can't keep up with life's demands, I don't have what it takes, so on and so forth. The physiological impact on your body is significantly worse if you're thinking that, if you're having that self-talk once you're feeling stressed. And so it makes a big difference if you can just create an awareness with yourself and with the people that you know, that the way you think about stress impacts the way it affects your body. And we know that stress hormones are released, and when they're released, it can act as a catalyst, as a motivator, but it also can immobilize us if we let it go on for too long. And that has to do with this mindset as well. And so if we have that negative perception of stress and we let it go for too long, and we have our foot on the gas pedal for too long, that acute stress that's episodic, ongoing, can become chronic stress. It is progressive. And so we have this flurry of stress hormones running through our body, the tap's on full, and it impacts us. It impacts our bodies in negative ways, which we know it predisposes us to disease, and it impacts our brain, particularly the hippocampus, which is responsible for memory and learning, specifically of new experiences. But it also affects our prefrontal cortex, which is related to those executive functions, the decision making, the planning, the emotion regulation. And so changing your mindset changes this physiology. And instead of having that tap on full of stress hormones, it's down to a drip where it's useful and you can use it as a catalyst to take action. So how does diet play a role? We have the brain-gut axis. We know we have hundreds of thousands of neurons in our gut, and it communicates with our brain regularly. And what we've determined, what the researchers have determined, is that when we're stressed, we often want and crave those unhealthy foods, the chips, the cookies, the processed and refined carbohydrates, the processed food. And we know that they're not good for us, but they're really not good for our brains because of the hormones that they release. It causes us to crash, and this increases stress and anxiety within our body, but also within our brain, which then affects our thinking. And so avoiding those types of foods, or calling them sometimes foods, like we call them at home, is really important, because it's not going to help you. We also know that there are certain foods that affect our gut that contribute to increased stress. So having that healthy gut microbiome is key, and eating foods that contribute to a healthy microbiome is really important, such as high fiber diets, anything in the Mediterranean diet, taking those probiotics. All of those things influence the way that you manage and deal with stress in your life. And the negative foods increase stress and anxiety in your life. And so there's heaps of information and research on this, and psychologists and GPs are now actually recommending, the ones who are into the gut microbiome research are recommending people go on probiotics when they are feeling anxious, when they are feeling stressed, because there's research out there that has demonstrated it helps. Versus when we have those healthy fats, anything from the Mediterranean diet, they release those positive neurotransmitters that support feeling full, but they also help us regulate our mood, our sleep, and our energy. And so getting as much of these foods into our diet as possible will serve you well when it comes to managing and dealing with stress. Now, exercise, with diet and exercise, we could have done a whole presentation around each of those. However, I've limited it to one slide. And exercise, we know all of the physical benefits of exercise, but we also know how it affects our brain. So first and foremost, it releases a brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is a protein which helps create new neurons, so new brain cells, which we didn't know 10 years ago. We now know that exercise does that, which is a bonus. It decreases cognitive decline as a result. it increases the length of telomeres on the end of our cells. So the telomeres are like shoelace covers at the end of the shoelaces. They protect the cells and they stop the cells from aging. And so exercise and meditation increase telomere length, which is incredible. And BDNF also increases our cognitive capacity with regards to focus, with regards to staying on task, with regards to, clear thinking, having that clarity of mind. We get those positive neurotransmitters, number 2, such as adrenaline and endorphins, and these are the feel-good hormones. And they encourage us to, take action, but also kind of relish in those positive emotions, that exercise high that you get. And all of these things combat stress. We know that. And so it's not just exercise for the sake of doing it for your body, but the impact that it has on your brain, and then consequently the neurotransmitters that are released demonstrate that it's great for exercise, And again, GPs are telling people who are feeling anxious, stressed, depressed, the first line treatment is start going for a walk on the beach, start exercising. 10 years ago, 5 years ago, they definitely wouldn't have done that. And so getting a regular exercise routine is key. We know that exercise increases oxygen to the brain, and that just brings fresh blood, clear thinking, and the benefits of that kind of go on and on and on and on, with regards to mood regulation, with regards to having that perspective, being able to step back and having that emotional awareness around how you're feeling. And it enables you as well to, post run, you have that runner's high, but you also feel more aware of what's going on in your body. And lastly, I've briefly mentioned it, exercise leads to that positive emotion. And there's heaps of research out there on what positive emotion does for us. With regards to exercise, it can give us a number of positive emotions, such as inspiration, joy, awe, and we need to hold on to those positive emotions, because we know that the more we savor positive emotions, the more resilient we are. So when we're facing stressful situations, we have positive emotions in spades that we've held on to from exercise, from different activities in our life. And this relates to that whole balance of well-being that I talk about in one of my well-being workshops. With regards to well-being is when you have a balance between the physical, social, and psychological resources that you possess and the physical, social, and psychological challenges that you face. And when there's an imbalance is when we're stressed. And it's not a bad thing, because we need stress in order to grow, right? Stress is good for us. However, when that imbalance is persistent and it lasts, that's when we have to refuel those tanks of psychological, social, and physical resources. And obviously, exercise and diet, they contribute to, our physical resources, but we also now know that they contribute to our psychological resources. So it's something I could talk about for hours, but I will leave it at that. And I will finish off, 30 minutes already. I feel like I'm a motor mouth through these 30-minute webinars. I will finish off with my favorite quote about stress. And it's by Susan David from her book, Emotional Agility. And she says, discomfort is the price of admission to a meaningful life. So having that discomfort and stress in your life will lead you to a meaningful life. Awesome.